All right, today we're going to get into a story. It's about a lifelong rivalry, and it's one of those that's just so personal, but also, as you'll see, surprisingly universal. And let me tell you, it takes a twist so sharp you are not going to see it coming.
I mean, think about it. What happens when a childhood rivalry just never ends? For most of us, thankfully, that's just a hypothetical question. But for these two guys, Helen and Shady, this question became the central and ultimately really tragic theme of their entire lives. So yeah, let's dive into their story.
Okay, so our story kicks off where a lot of these things do, in school. But this was no ordinary playground. You've got to picture it more like this: peculiar social pressure cooker, one that would end up shaping absolutely everything that followed.
And right away, you hit this first major contradiction. So Helen and Shady, they were in the popular circle. But, and this is a big but, this was in one of the country's absolute poorest school districts. The source material really nails the description. It was like being the tallest person in Italy, you know? They were kings of a very, very small hill. And that kind of environment, it just breeds a very specific and very potent kind of insecurity.
And that insecurity, it wasn't just vague. It was rooted in something really personal for both of them. You see, both boys were born with things that, cruel kids would call defects. Helen had a congenital heart condition that left him with this big, nasty scar. And Shady, he was born with 2 extra fingers that had to be removed. And he was covered in what he called dark, disgusting hair. So they had this shared foundation, right? This feeling of being physically scarred. It gave them both this desperate need for acceptance. But man, it sent them down 2 totally different roads.
So, faced with that same pressure, that same need to fit in, they each chose a completely different way to try and climb the social ladder.
And their paths just split right down the middle, immediately. Helen's approach was all about self-improvement. He focused on building himself up, learning the trendy dances, joining the football team as a kicker. Shady's strategy, though, it was the exact opposite. It was all about tearing things and people down. He became popular by enabling bad behavior. Hosting these anything-goes parties. He was that guy. And a huge piece of his plan involved tearing someone else down to lift himself up.
And here is the absolute key to this whole story. Shady made a cold, hard calculation. He looked at their group, and he identified Helen as the quote-unquote weakest one, the one person he could target, the one person he could put down over and over again to make himself look better. So you've got to understand, this was not a mutual rivalry. It was a one-sided, targeted campaign, and it started in childhood, and as we're about to see, it literally never stopped.
All right, so this is where the story really takes a dark turn. Because what started as, typical schoolyard bullying, it didn't just fade away after graduation. No way. For Shady, it twisted into this really disturbing, decades-long obsession.
I mean, just look at how this thing escalated. It's chilling. It starts with just character assassination in childhood, then in the teenage years, it's just constant put-downs. But then it gets into adulthood, and it becomes something truly bizarre. We're talking about Shady, at age 37, still drunk prank-calling Helen, harassing him, hitting on his wife at weddings. This grudge didn't just fade, it festered, it grew. And the absolute centerpiece of this adult obsession was this twisted, ongoing joke that he kept up for more than a decade. Shady would come up with these incredibly elaborate, detailed plots. We're talking over 100 different stories. And they all had the exact same morbid ending: Helen's death. Just think about that. The amount of creative energy he poured into pure hatred, it's just staggering.
And just in case you thought, oh, it's just a sick joke, listen to this. This was his actual plan for the funeral. He wanted to go in order to piss on his grave or coffin or any family members, etc. Yeah, his dedication to this hatred was, well, it was absolute. And it was deeply, deeply disturbing.
Okay, so while Shady is spending decades of his life completely consumed by this one-sided war, what about Helen? What was he up to? This is where the whole story just pivots on a dime, and we start heading towards that final, shocking irony.
Well, it turns out the target of all this venom, all this obsession, he just didn't care. At all. Helen was completely unbothered. He never engaged, he never took the bait. Why? Because he was too busy living his own life, completely indifferent to Shady's petty, one-man war.
And wow, what a life it was. While Shady was busy inventing these twisted death scenarios, Helen was out in the real world, racking up actual victories. He beat his congenital heart disease, he won a state championship, he graduated from college, got married, had a family. And then he became a community leader, an elected official in the very same town where all this started. One guy was building a legacy. The other was just nursing a grudge.
So just remember that, for over a decade, the core of Shady's whole obsession was dreaming up a tragic, ironic death for Helen.
But life had a different punchline. Turns out, life is the ultimate storyteller, and sometimes its sense of humor is incredibly dark.
You know, there's actually a term for what happened next. It's called cosmic irony. That's the idea that some higher power, fate, the universe, whatever you want to call it, seems to be messing with things just to mock somebody. And in this story, the person getting mocked was the guy who thought he was writing all the jokes.
Because the one who died was Shady.
And the details, I mean, they're just devastatingly ironic. After spending years ignoring symptoms that he just dismissed as hemorrhoids, he died from butt cancer. Think about that. It sounds exactly like the kind of cruel, humiliating story Shady would have loved to invent about Helen. In the end, he literally became the punchline to his own sick joke.
And all of this just leaves us with a final question, right? What really defines a life? Is it the rivalries we keep or the mountains we climb? This whole strange, tragic story of Helen and Shady really forces you to think about where you're putting your energy. One man focused on building a life, on climbing real mountains, both personal and professional. The other, he dedicated his life to trying to tear just one person down. And in the end, well, their fates give the brutal, unforgettable answer.